I want people to know that Scripture is an effort to make sense of who God is. Know which context the Scripture is being written from. I mean, it may be being written from a place of despair, a place of, wanting to know God better, a place of anger, rage. And some of it are just ancient stories that started out as oral tradition, and they wrote them down. So I guess to say there's a lot of history in the interpretation of Scripture and in the telling of the stories. And I wish people wouldn't just think God handed it to us in perfect King James English. Context is really important. Social location is really important. We heard a lot about that in seminary, about being aware of the social location of the writers of Scripture, being aware of what communities they were speaking to, being aware of where we are in the midst of it. As a queer woman, I am going to look at certain scriptures differently. I'm going to have different reactions to them. We're all going to have different reactions to Scripture. And so when we look at Scripture, we have to bring that into. It's interesting. There are some traditions that try to pull this stuff out of the tradition. Well, we're just not going to talk about that. You can go to any UCC and you may hear poetry instead of a Scripture reading or whatever, because people have given up trying to wrestle with that, because it's very hard. Will Gaffney, who's at Bright, brilliant Hebrew Bible scholar. She talks about how interpreting Scripture, we come into it kind of hitting a nail with the butt end of a screwdriver. It's like, it's not ideal. We still get the work done, because it's like a different, but we're in such a different context. And if you come into it thinking, okay, there's this doctrinal way that we interpret Scripture that's the right way, we miss all that opportunity. We miss all that opportunity, that mess, the foment, the way to have conversation in relationship with one another. It's like, oh gosh, how are you hearing this? You have to take the whole context, instead of that one verse that people pull out and say, you're going to hell because of this, and this says this. That's just no way to use the Bible. It's not a club. And of course, I'm intimately aware of it as queer, because we were just clobbered with certain scriptures, Leviticus, Romans 1, those kinds of things. And so to come into seminary and to finally understand that Paul was trying to achieve a very specific thing in Romans 1, and that was the way he argued. And you have to read the whole thing to understand his rhetorical, what he was doing in that. Now, he was still homophobic, which was not a word when he was doing his thing, because of his context and because of his culture. But if you get back away from it, which I was able to do a lot in seminary, and it was so life-giving and so beautiful, and I came, instead of hating Scripture, to love it again.